Hi, in this video I'll talk through what variables are, the different types you'll encounter in psychological research, and why controlling them is so important for producing valid and reliable results. A variable is simply something that can change. In psychology, variables can differ between people, between conditions, or even within the same person over time. For example, your mood, your age, your reaction time, or the number of hours you sleep. All of these are variables because they can vary. In an experiment, the independent variable is what the researcher deliberately changes or manipulates. The dependent variable is what the researcher measures. It's the outcome or effect. So in a study on caffeine and memory, the amount of caffeine would be the independent variable, and the number of words remembered would be the dependent variable. Extraneous variables are any other factor apart from the independent variable that could influence the dependent variable. There are different types of extraneous variables. Situational variables are aspects of the environment that might influence the results, for example, room temperature, noise, lighting. Participant variables, or individual differences, are characteristics of participants that might influence the results, such as age, mood, motivation. And there's also experimenter variables, which are behaviors or expectations of the researcher that could unintentionally affect the dependent variable. If these aren't controlled, they could interfere with the results. This brings us to confounding variables. A confounding variable is a special kind of extraneous variable that actually did have an impact on the results. It confuses the cause and effect relationship between the independent and the dependent variable. All confounding variables are extraneous, but not all extraneous variables become confounding. For example, if one group is tested in the morning and the other in the afternoon, time of the day might be the real reason for any differences in performance. You might think that using might infers that it's an extraneous variable, because using the cautionary language suggests it might not have actually had an effect on the results. Well, in real research, we usually infer whether an EV has become a CV based on patterns in the data or issues in the study design. We can't directly see a variable confounding the results. We identify it when it's a plausible alternative explanation for the findings. So in this example, since the testing times systematically differ between groups with the IV, it creates a risk that any effect we see is due to that difference. Here's an easy rule of thumb to remember. If a variable is considered, measured, or controlled, it stays an extraneous variable. But if it's ignored and actually influences the dependent variable, it becomes a confounding variable. Let's bring the different variables to life with a quick story. Here's Ian, our independent variable. In one condition, he's wearing his regular clothes, a t-shirt and trousers. And in the other, he's wearing gym clothes, a tank top and sweatpants. So that's what's being manipulated, Ian's look. Then there's Daisy. She's our dependent variable. We're measuring something about her, specifically her heart rate, to see how it changes depending on Ian's outfit. Now, there's also Ethan, a handsome businessman. If Ethan walked past during the study, Daisy's heart rate could easily go up, right? That means Ethan could affect the dependent variable. But since we know that, we make sure he stays away during the experiment. We've controlled his influence. So he's an extraneous variable, something that could affect the results, but doesn't because we're controlling it. But then there's something else. When Ian wears his regular day clothes, he also puts on cologne out of habit. So now we can't quite tell what affected Daisy's heart rate, whether it was Ian's outfit or his different scent. Now that's a confounding variable. It could well have had an effect on the dependent variable, Daisy's heart rate. So to wrap it up, remember, every experiment has variables, but only some of them are intentional. The independent variable is what we manipulate, and the dependent variable is what we measure. Extraneous variables are all those other things that could sneak in and influence the dependent variable. We aim to control them. If one of those extraneous variables actually changes along with the independent variable and affects the results, it becomes a confounding variable. The golden rule: if you control your extraneous variables well, you avoid confounds, and your results will be more valid.